Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with an antebellum Charles Coulombe.
That's right. Antebellum. Before the war. Yep.
But
Before
which
the war. Doesn't matter. Any of them. Any of the wars. The Revolution. The Second Civil War. The Mexican War. The days of the Dons and the Ranchos stretched all over California. Before the Spanish-American War, when Spain lived and ruled in the Philippines and Cuba and Puerto Rico. Before World War I, when the Austro-Hungarian Emperor and the other folks, the Tsar of Russia, the German Kaiser, were on their thrones. Before World War II and the Final Solution and all that guff. Before Korea, the Korean War and Vietnam, and before them all. I mean, I stand foursquare for peace. That's right. I stand for peaceful conditions and against those who would break up the peace. That's right. I got to tell you, there's been a whole lot of bellowing, bellicosity.
Bellicosity. I don't know.
Yeah, being bellicose.
Bellicose, yeah.
Combative, fighting, warfare. There's been a lot of that in the streets of my native land this past week.
In Austria?
Rioting and looting and all that kind of stuff.
You're talking about America. I thought you were talking about Austria for a second. Okay.
No, I live in Austria, but my homeland are those United States. The country that birthed and nurtured me. The country which, until I was 58, I lived in 57, but who's counting? I lived in happily and loyally, and in which country I may well return. You never know. But it really has horrified me to see what I've seen this past week, to see the buildings burned in city after city, the wreckage in LA, the wreckage in New York, the wreckage in Richmond, the burning of the United Daughters of the Confederacy headquarters with irreplaceable relics of the Civil War. Absolutely irreplaceable. There's nothing to be said for that, except that any cause that you claim to be looting in honor of, you've just besmirched. I know that's a big word. I had kind of a bit of a laugh on this because, you know, the new correctness is really stifling these days, and everybody's ultra sensitive and so forth. Well, okay. I'm French Canadian. I have to speak English all the time. Now, I don't like that. I don't like it that I speak English all the time so much that I'm now better at it than I am at French. I don't like that at all. Now, that doesn't seem important to the vast majority of people, and that by itself should give me a chip on my shoulder bigger than a redwood tree. But I'm very fortunate in that I had parents who were not stupid. And they understood that if you're going to live in an Anglo world, you have to understand the Anglo and you have to speak his language as well or better than he does. And I think I do. I think my English is fairly good. Don't you?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's the price. I mean, if it's that much of a problem for me, I need to pack up and go somewhere French. Now, which honestly would have a lot of benefits, but that's a whole other story. I will admit this country is filled with racism, all right, but it's not the racism people think it is. And I've discussed this with a lot of black friends over the past week. Do you want to know what the real racism afflicting this country is?
What?
It's the idea that blacks are incapable of meeting white standards of behavior, that somehow they are unable to do anything because of their history. But you know what gives the lie to that? The fact that under Jim Crow, when they were restricted in where they could go and what they could do, and they couldn't vote, they couldn't do a lot of things in the South, they built up an incredible network of institutions, colleges, and businesses. They were incredible. And this is completely forgotten. Absolutely forgotten. Nobody remembers it. I was very happy to see, I didn't see the film, but I was happy with the thing coming out, that movie, The Green Book. I was very happy that finally that particular thing, which was a guide to black-friendly and black-owned businesses across the country, at a time when if a black wanted to drive, say, from New York to California, there were a lot of places it wouldn't serve him. There were a lot of towns he didn't dare stay in overnight. But what happened? Well, what happened was the Green Book, so that a black motorist would know exactly where to go. And the interesting thing I'm just using this as one little example to tell a huge story. The fellow that started the Green Book was a gentleman, oddly enough, by the name of Green, hence the name. But it was kind of also kind of taken over the Blue Book, the Red Book. There were all these kinds of travel books. The Green Book was constantly updated. Now, how did Mr. Green manage to do this? The answer is he worked for the post office. And he had postmen all over America filling him in on conditions in their local area. That's how he did it. Now that was utterly brilliant. So, don't tell me that blacks aren't capable, because they are. They absolutely are. But we live in a society whose masters insist on infantilizing them. And that's racism. And it's worse because so many of the people behind it, I'm thinking of Planned Parenthood, for instance, have a history of utter contempt, not just for blacks, but for non-whites in general. There's a good reason Margaret Sanger was photographed at Klan meetings, So I realize that this is a hard saying, and I know that nobody wants to hear it, and I know that it's all got to be hooray for our side, whatever our side happens to be. But unfortunately, as is so often the case in the real world, it's not like that. It's not like that at all. So, I can tell you that what I'm afraid of is not simply what we're seeing, but what the reaction will be. Because you see, all of the country is not Los Angeles and New York and Richmond. Already, in which I'm afraid is the shape of things to come, a group of rioters, having smashed the downtown of Spokane, Washington, moved on to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Now, this was not a very smart move. They were greeted in Coeur d'Alene not by the police, but by, you guessed it, Coeur d'Aleneans armed to the teeth. And if they had gotten out of the bus and several automobiles that had brought them to Coeur d'Alene, they probably would have been shot to pieces. So they very intelligently turned around and went back to Spokane. I suspect, that that's not the only example of what's going on in the country right now, but I also suspect that if this does not stop, you're going to see a lot more of it. And there are two other quick points I want to make. One is, in Los Angeles and elsewhere, you're having all these calls to defund the police. Well, that's not really smart in the face of rioting and so forth, but it does more than that. The more than that is that it will lead the general citizen who has to worry about his home and his business to think that their city governments are insane. And there will be a price to pay for that. Lastly, but not leastly, you'll hear a lot of talk about conspiracy, about how bricks were piled up at different places. Some people point the finger at George Soros. Some people point the finger at the right and the Trumpster himself, the Boogaloo Boys, and so forth. I don't know, but this much I do know. If the intent behind this has been to derail the Trumpster's reelection, I don't think it's going to work. I'm so old that I remember the long, hot summer in 1967. Now, when I think of the summer of 67, I prefer to think of the summer of love in San Francisco. And Scott McKenzie singing away and flowers in their hair and all that. And it's true, that was San Francisco. But in 159 other cities across the country, in that long, hot summer of 67, you didn't have people with flowers in their hair, you had race riots. Race riots were so bad in at least two of those cities, Newark, New Jersey, and Detroit, Michigan, that those cities have never recovered, not to this very day. It was a miserable, miserable time. But you know what else it did? It put Richard Nixon in the White House. Because after that summer, nobody was going to trust a Democrat with that. And thinking back, I mean, my gosh, Hubert Humphrey trying to do something or other about the state of the nation. This won't mean anything to you, but trust me, he was not the most effectual guy running around. But it put Nixon in the White House, and I suspect that this stuff will have the opposite effect of what many of its members, if not promoters, have in mind. I think it will probably ensure the Trumpster's return in November. I can't imagine anybody from a place that's been devastated by rioting voting for Joe Biden. I just can't. And the worst of it is, the murder of the fellow in Minneapolis was a dreadful thing, and the cop in question is awaiting his trial. Okay, that's it. You have quite a number of people dying in encounters like that every year, and there are more whites than blacks who die in such encounters. That too is a matter of public record. I think probably none of this would have happened in the way it has happened if it hadn't been for the lockdown, because people are tired of being locked down. No doubt about it. One of the other things I should touch on is that this is going to show us a lot if there's a huge outbreak of the virus amongst the rioters and the cops over the next 2 weeks. If there is, then we'll know that the lockdown was completely justified. If there isn't, but I do think that those municipalities who authorize demonstrations while keeping the churches shut have a lot to answer for. There's no social distancing and I'm talking about the peaceful demonstrations now, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, people who are looting and rioting are not really interested in the law anyway. But I'm talking strictly about the peaceful demonstrations. How is it that you're COVID free if you're in a demonstration, but not if you're in church? I don't
understand why you don't get that. We're going to leverage this into the memes of production.
Well, wait a minute. Before we do that, I've got to vent my anger. Nationalize the memes of production. There
you go. And Forrest Gump says, and just like that, coronavirus doesn't affect you if you're rioting, looting, robbing, or burning down buildings.
That's true. It doesn't. You're immune.
Yeah. It's funny how that works.
I think it's great. We've discovered a cure. No need for a vaccine.
Next one. This is a fun one. Why is everyone looting and rioting? Because the coronavirus scam is fading, and the murder hornets were a bust. What a sad day. What
It
a
is
sad.
hard.
I disagree. Obviously, coronavirus isn't a scam, but it's fun to say scam. It's fun to call it a scam. A scam
It
is one
is
of
fun.
those brutal words with a strong connotation that's just fun to say. It makes it fun.
Yeah. One thing you should bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that we do not necessarily endorse everything the memes and productions say, but they sure get a laugh. And I got to tell you, the murder hornets, that came and went.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because I tell you, when that came up, I immediately thought there's some funny business going on in the media. Like, they are trying to elicit fear.
Yeah.
Like murder horn, like they're not even named murder hornets. Like that was gratuitously tagged on to by by God knows who, right?
I think the RAF should start rioting.
The RAF?
REF.
What's the REF? I don't.
The Radical Entomologists Front. They stand up for the rights of insects and for their reputations. And I think we need to have the RAF riot outside the media. The CNN would be a good place to start.
Okay, last meme. When you go off the deep end, what am I supposed to say, Charles? What am I supposed to say? What do you want me to say?
All right. If you were a psychiatric professional, what you would say is, "Oh, that's very interesting." And do they have an actual agenda, or are they playing it by ear? That's what you would say if you were a psychiatric professional.
I'm not, though.
You're not?
I'm not a psychiatric. What is this? An asylum I'm running here?
Well, I let's just say certain departments in Tumblr House resemble one very deeply. We're not really an asylum, but we play one on TV. I think sometimes the motor pool, ever since the lockdown, the motor pool guys have gotten very close to being an asylum. Because they've got nothing to do. They don't make deliveries. They don't pick up dignitaries anymore. They don't run your executives all over town. They just sit there in the motor pool all day, changing the engine, running the batteries, polishing the cars. I mean, it's no wonder that they get a little cray-cray.
Yeah. What do you want from them, Charles? You're so unhappy with the whole organization in general. And
I am not unhappy with the organization. Up the organization. I've always said that. I'm the man in the gray flannel suit. That's me.
All right.
I'm a cog in the wheel and proud of it.
Good. Okay, our last meme, I think I got this from Steve from Census Fidelium, his Twitter. I don't know if he created it, but it's from his. When pro-choicers try to enforce masks. Wear a mask. I don't want to. You'll die. My body, my choice. It's not just your body involved. You don't say. Love that cat.
The cat obviously is antisocial. Who, by the way, was the sister of Antebellum.
Ha ha ha.
What? I'm just saying.
So bad. All right.
You gotta laugh, you'll cry, ladies and gentlemen. Honestly. Oh, by the way, before I forget, before we move on to the questions, I should tell you that I asked Tyrone before the show if you've lifted the shoot to kill orders on the perimeter, and apparently not.
Why would I? Are you kidding me? All of LA County has been under curfew the past, at 4 days of this past week. Yeah,
but I mean, I heard from Tyrone that they had some sheriffs coming up to check the place out to make sure that everything was all right, and you had like a standoff. I mean, Tyrone says, "Stay where you are," and they say, "Sheriffs." And Tyrone says, "I don't know that. You could be anybody. I've got orders to shoot to kill." They said, well, they offered to show their ID, but Tyrone refused because he said they'd have to get too close to the perimeter. I mean, I understand you made a phone call and straightened things out, but I just
Yeah,
I don't want to say that the guards have gotten trigger happy, but
we'll need to
you
fix
know,
that. We need to, yeah. It's a little bit of a problem. We need to
yeah,
have our security work with law enforcement in tandem a little bit better, I would say.
I think so. I think so. Tyrone's telling me, they're not calling the streets that surround the tower. They're not calling them streets anymore. They're all called fields of fire. I mean, what? It's and the thing is, I said to him, look, okay, Tyrone, great. I appreciate that you're really into security and all that, but there hasn't been any rioting up this way. There's been nothing. And he says to me, "Oh yeah, they tagged the Albertsons."
They did. They did. Right by. Yes, they did. That I can confirm.
Yeah, but I mean, to him, that justifies, and sending the helicopter around in hourly sweeps.
Well, let me ask you this.
All right.
So you think it would be okay if somebody tagged the Mona Lisa?
No, I don't think it would be all right if someone tagged
The
them on
Tumbler
this.
House building has various relics, works of art. There are treasures in there that look at.
No, I understand, but I mean, it's not even. I mean, now you've got a bloody electrified fence. What's next? A moat with crocodiles or something?
That's a good idea. I like crocodiles.
All right, fine.
Crocodiles have a lot of personality. You ever notice that about alligators and crocodiles? Whenever they open their mouth, they just look so happy all the time.
Okay, fine. All right, fine. You want a moat? You want crocodiles in the moat? You go right ahead.
I think that's fun.
And let me guess. In order to pay for it, my payments are going to be reduced slightly.
Well, it's a cost-sharing program, Charles.
Yes, I know. We all need the safety that only crocodiles can provide.
We need to.
I understand. All right. No, I'm not arguing. I told you I'm a cog in the wheel. Corporate policy is by me okay. In the immortal words of the mailroom master in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. Absolutely. Yeah. But at any rate.
Yeah, at any rate.
Enough of this roll to fall.
All right, yes, time for the questions.
Yes.
A bunch of questions from Theo. First one. Dear Charles, why is the food in Catholic countries nearly always better than the food in Protestant countries?
Well, it's made with love. All right, well, there's more to it than that.
Protestants don't put love in their food?
They do put love in their food, but the problem is partly one of climate, because, of course, the Mediterranean countries, which tend to be Catholic, have a lot more, shall we say, in the way of spices and so forth. Catholic countries tend to be much more liberal with wine. I mean, unfortunately, in Protestant countries, not all of them, but a lot of them, Calvinism really discouraged enjoying cuisine for its own sake. You wanted good, plain, honest food, kept you going so you could work. Not this kind of Dago red stuff that, you would just sit there and enjoy. And really, the Puritan impulse is one reason why, in general, Catholic countries have had more pleasant food, more pleasant drink, more pleasant music, more pleasant artwork, etc. Mind you, it's not as though Protestant countries lack any of that stuff entirely. They surely don't. But it was not really looked on in a lot of Protestant places as being goods in themselves, you see. And in Catholic countries, all of those things were looked on as being good in and of themselves and worth excelling at, worth taking a lot of time over. The Puritan work ethic did not extend to cuisine.
It's interesting. I actually had wondered kind of related question, which is why do all the Catholic countries, why are they known for their wine, and all the Protestant countries are known for their beer? You know,
Well, that's got more to do with weather. Protestant countries, again, tend to be more northerly. And
yeah.
so
No, I was
hops,
thinking of that as you said Mediterranean. I thought, aha, that's
yeah.
it.
So a lot of that, I mean, it's different now, but you're not going to be growing wine in Sweden.
Well, I was thinking like United Kingdom, Germany.
Well, the UK is starting having grapes again, and they had them under the Romans. But for a long time, because of climate change, it was too cold to have grapes in England. But then the climate warmed up again, and so now you can have them again. But at one point, of course, it was warm enough in Labrador that they were able to grow grapes there. Hence Vinland.
Hmm.
But then there was another bit of climate change, doubtless due to the Vikings' automobiles and factories, and what? And so as a result, you had another little ice age, and that had the effect, apart from killing the grapes in Vinland, it also wiped out the Norse colonies in Greenland. The last of them becoming extinct the first couple of decades of the 1400s. So it's sort of ironic that Columbus came at the very end of that century. And there was still European settlements in North America at the very beginning of that century.
Okay. Theo's second question. Dear Mr. Coulombe, in Pius XII's homily for the canonization of St. Louis de Montfort in 1947, the pontiff said that, without exaggeration, quote, the Vendée of 1793 was the work of his hands, end quote. Dr. Plinio said that the missions of the great saint preserved the people from the germs of revolution. What are your thoughts? Is there a Mariology to history? Is it a coincidence that the counter-revolution, which will end with the triumph of the Immaculata to come, began as a result of the work of the great Marian doctor? St. Louis wrote that since Christ entered the world through Mary, his reign on earth will be established through Mary too. Bishop Athanasius Schneider says that we can participate in bringing this about in the counter-revolution through true Marian devotion, and so bring about the reign of Mary in our hearts, which will be realized in the world in the future.
Well, yeah. I mean, in the book of Genesis, as we know, the woman will, referred to the Virgin Mary, the devil will lie in wait for her heel, and she will crush the serpent's head. That goes all the way back to Genesis. So absolutely, positively. And yes, I mean, St. Louis Marie de Montfort actually predicted the war in the Vendée. There was a market cross in a town he used to preach in. And he said that when it was completely covered with moss, war would come to the area. And it did. So, yeah, I would say that that's all quite true. And, Mary's triumphs are her son's triumphs. And if the devil hates with a passion being bested by man, he hates even more being bested by woman. Because after all, it was through a woman that he was able to lure the human race to its destruction. So it's only appropriate, only fitting that it's through a woman that the human race triumph.
This question reminds me of what Solon Schertz said. Solon Schertz, for those of you who don't know, is she passed away several years ago, but we published 9 of her books. But she says that history now is a prize fight between Mary and the devil for souls, and she makes the point. I forgot which book, but that the souls lost during the Protestant revolt, which I guess was 1 million or something like that, was dwarfed with the discovery of the New World. and all the souls which converted as a result of that. I think she might have said 3 million. Don't quote me on it though.
No,
So
but that's true. And
yeah,
also, there were a lot at the same time converted in the East Indies by people like St. Francis Xavier.
and she also makes the point. It's kind of an important point. It's easy to forget about this, where with Columbus, I think a lot of secular people feel that, well, the discovery of America was an inevitability, that somebody had to do it, and so it just happened to be this guy who happened to be Catholic. Whereas she ascribes more purpose to it. And she says something like, no, this was God's providence, and that through Catholicism, that God would allow the old world to discover the new world.
No.
And so that I thought that was interesting.
And it's very true. I mean, Columbus's discovery of the New World. If we remember, he had his 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. He made landfall on the Feast of Our Lady of the Pillar. And he promised Our Lady that he would turn back if he didn't find land on her day. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on and on. And that's why, very, very rightly, Pope Pius XII made Our Lady of Guadalupe the Empress of the Americas.
Yeah.
So what's true here is true, or rather what's true over there is true of everywhere. Here in Austria, of course, the great Marian shrine, they have a lot of them, but the biggest is called Maria Zell, and the image venerated there is called the Magna Mater Austriae, the Great Mother of Austria. And pilgrims come from all over, not just Austria, but Hungary and Czechia and Slovakia and so on, to venerate her. Yeah, I mean, the victory will come through the Rosary. It will come through the Immaculate Heart.
Next question is from Youssef. Do you think with the growth of many little minority communities in America and most of the modern world, that we are going to see a lot more small business to cater to those small ethnic communities? Could this lay seed for a more distributist economic system?
No, it's possible. I don't know. It could be. I certainly hope so. Certainly, it's very difficult for the major chains to cater to the needs of little ethnic groups. You don't go into Walmart and find that much in the way of Indian spices.
I studied this a little bit in college, international business, where McDonald's does make adjustments in food.
Oh, they do. They do, but it's never enough. I mean, people go to McDonald's because they want some of the American stuff.
That's true.
They do make adjustments, but it's not.
It's not all the way there. Yeah.
No,
it's not authentic.
And there is, for instance, in Monrovia. I mean, I know this, but there's a big Indian supermarket. It's on Huntington Drive.
Huntington okay. I haven't noticed it.
No, I mean, it'd be easy not to see because it's in a strip mall. With a lot of other similarly unimportant seeming businesses. But places like that, I mean, in the same mall, there's this Armenian restaurant, and obviously the things they get, they're not getting from Walmart. They're not getting from Albertsons, especially since it was tagged.
Yeah.
Because, nobody will go to Albertsons now that it's tagged. But what?
Why are you always bagging on our Albertsons?
I'm not bagging on Albertsons. I'm just saying that because it's tagged, a lot of people aren't going to want to go there. That's all.
What, you're saying I'm too sensitive?
No, I'm not saying you're too sensitive. I didn't say you wouldn't go there. You'd go to Albertsons. wouldn't you?
Oh, my secretary would go.
Well, you're too sensitive to go to Albertsons even when it's not tagged or any other retail store. But in the normal run of things, for most people. Anyway, all kidding aside, so it's possible. It's certainly something to hope for. Anyway.
Okay. A bunch of questions from Mr. Fugu.
Oh, the fugu fish, man.
Yes. How does one evangelize elderly non-Catholic relatives? I have a relative with whom I have a close relationship, but I'm not sure how to broach the subject of Catholicism, much less how to discuss the concept of last rites with them. I'm the only Catholic in a low-church Protestant family with a generally anti-Catholic mindset. One of the struggles is that there's some key concepts that they don't even have a point of reference for, even if they are relatively amenable to Catholic Christianity.
Well, if the person is ambulatory, I would say you should suggest that you pick them up a Sunday, take them to the best mass you know, and then give them a good meal. And tell them, I go to mass on Sundays, but if you like, this Sunday I'll pick you up. We'll go to mass, and then I'll take you out to lunch.
Well, playing devil's advocate, and you do this so seamlessly. Playing devil's advocate for us mere mortals. What if the person offers resistance and says, "Well, can't you just pick me up and we go to dinner?"
No.
But that's okay. Well, I guess try it. How do people respond when you do that? I mean, other than your friend with confession. Confession, I feel, is a little easier when you're doing with other Catholics who haven't gone to confession in a long time.
As a rule, I find that people will do anything if there's food or booze at the end of it.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Really and truly. Because, see, again, especially if the person is in a home, you're not going to be taking them out for dinner anyway. So it simply would be much less. It would be very inconvenient for you not to take the person to mass and then to lunch.
So food and booze, free food and free booze, is the way to break through bad will.
Not always, but a lot of the time.
But you see what I'm saying here? Like, when a person has operated under bad will for so long, it seems like an easy... Like, it's hard to believe. It's like, oh, yeah, I just needed some free food and booze, and you just broke through my bad will like that.
Well, let's put it this way. It doesn't mean that they're going to suddenly demand baptism on the spot. What it does mean, though, is that it will put them a little bit in your debt. And they will be curious about what it is you do and why you feel it's so necessary to go to Mass on a Sunday.
Okay.
And they'll have questions about what they see, especially if it's a Latin Mass or a Byzantine Mass or an Ordinariate Mass. The sad truth of the matter is that the more like a Protestant service the Mass is, the fewer questions they'll have.
Okay. Fair enough. Another question. If and when the Latin Church comes back to its senses liturgically and theologically, what post-conciliar developments in the life of the Church, for lack of a better term, ought to be considered genuinely beneficial organic developments?
Well, that's a very hard question, but if I were to run a guess, I would say a couple of things. Probably the permanent diaconate. It can be useful in places where you just where you have got a shortage of priests. I have to admit, I was very amused years ago. There was a magazine for Eucharistic ministers, and it objected to the permanent diaconate on the basis that permanent deacons are muscling in on the Eucharistic minister's territory.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. I didn't make that up. And I read that. I just thought, okay, fine. Not a problem. Not okay,
A
great.
magazine for Eucharistic ministers? What do they talk about? Is it a weekly issue? What?
Well, they talked about a lot of things, but the thing about the diaconate, it just it was such a reversal of reality. It stuck in my mind. It really. Okay, great. I mean, it's like saying that paper plates would be better at the Derby than regular plates, because the problem with regular plates, is that the food tends to get. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to follow it out. Suffice to say, if you're going to say that paper plates are superior to porcelain plates, you're stupid.
Yeah.
So similarly, saying that deacons are somehow muscling in on Eucharistic ministers' territory is just brain dead. And I'm not against being brain dead. But the thing is too that interesting note about the married diaconate. As with Eastern Rite and Ordinariate priests, if a permanent deacon is widowed, he can't get married again. People don't know that, but it's true.
Okay.
So the other thing is that I would not be surprised, especially in areas where the general moral tone of life is so low, if a version of the adult catechumenate revival continues. It was predicted by none other than Dom Guéranger as being useful in places where you had a low moral standard. It was actually revived in the form that we know it for Africa, where this is a big problem with polygamy and all kinds of other things. And now it's been extended to the West. Now, the extension to the West may have been done with other things in mind, but given the way the moral tone of Western society has dropped, a really revamped adult catechumenate, I say revamped because the RCIA, as we know it, is a shambles, really, but it may stick with us, as a way of winnowing the wheat from the chaff, especially if we make a lot of converts from people who are, shall we say, addicted to modern lifestyles.
Okay. What do you think about Peter Maurin? How do you say it, Peter Maurin?
Maurin.
And the Catholic worker movement. I heard that he used...
That's pronounced Catholic Worker Movement.
I heard that he used to write something called Easy Essays, if Charles could comment on that.
Well, he did. He stopped when he died. No, Peter Maurin was a brilliant man. Interesting character. He was a Frenchman. And in France, he drank deeply of the Church's social teaching and of the work of people like Albert de Moat and René de la Tour du Pin. He came to America, worked various menial jobs, and at a rally, a working man's rally organized by the communists, he met a young reporter for Commonweal, a lady who's a convert herself, by the name of Dorothy Day. And their partnership resulted in the formation of the Catholic worker movement. Now, Dorothy Day, she's now up for canonization, but she was very much an activist. Peter Maurin was the theorist of the movement. And he would sometimes embarrass her, although they all thought he was an utter saint. But he would sometimes embarrass her and the other Catholic workers because they tended to come from sort of a socialist left-wing background, which colored some of the things they would do and say and think. But Peter Maurin was a French Catholic. And so we think of the Catholic worker as the left-wing movement, but Peter Maurin thought of himself as right-wing. And he said he wasn't in one of his easy essays, which are fun to read. You can get them online. He said that he was a man of the right because he wanted to be right. He was not a man of the left because he didn't want to be left behind. He would say things like that, which really annoyed and frustrated people. but they're very clever. They're worth reading. And in general, a lot of what the Catholic worker tried to do was very much in keeping with Belloc and Chesterton and so on, and distributism and all the rest of it. They got into a fight with a lot of people during World War II because they were not pacifists in the sense of saying that war is never moral. They did believe, however, and this is a fine distinction but an important one, they did believe that modern warfare had made just war, modern technology, had made just war, in the Church's sense, impossible. You are going to kill civilians by the score, or by the hundreds, or by the thousands. You're going to do all sorts of other things like that, which the Church traditionally forbade, and yet have become part and parcel.
How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah, do you agree with them?
Let's say I think they've got some really important points.
Okay.
I mean, I don't agree with them entirely, but I also don't think they're entirely wrong.
Okay.
And I think that, a large part of our problem today is the fact that warfare has become so anonymous. You just push a button and the enemy goes poof. Well, you tend to be a lot more careful about going to war if it's a bit more personal and intimate than that.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, there are a lot of our dead and wounded soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan who will show you that, war is still up close and personal for a lot of people. But they're not the ones directing the thing.
Yeah.
And this is the problem, you see, because the people who make the decisions are, in some cases, thousands of miles away from the scene of the battle and in no personal danger. Now, mind you, there are technological reasons and all that for this, but it's important to remember that the Church's ideas of just war and that kind of thing came about when kings still led their troops into battle.
Yeah.
And would occasionally decide a battle on the basis of personal combat. In other words, Army A, Army B, the king of this is the king of that. And for whatever reason, they suddenly get into their heads, let's you and me fight. And that way they don't have to.
I see.
Now, you couldn't imagine modern leaders doing that.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, anything else about Catholic worker movement? I didn't want to derail you too much.
Yeah, the Catholic worker movement, it's made up of very autonomous houses, each of whom are very different from one another. So of the ones I know, and I don't know that many of them, but the ones I know best, I would say probably the Houston Catholic worker is the most in line with the original charism of the thing. We have a group of them in Los Angeles, which I know somewhat. And actually, although I disagree with them on an awful lot of things, I definitely admire their work. And Jeff Dietrich, who's their head man many years ago, 20 years ago was a day, he told me something which I've never forgotten. I think it's very wise, and I will share it with you. And it's certainly very indicative of the Catholic worker. Now, he and his wife have run a soup kitchen in downtown LA since 1967. 53 years. And of course, in all that time, things have not gotten better in the Poverty Row section of LA. If anything, they're worse. Yet every day, the Catholic workers are out there slopping soup for the poor. Now, I asked him why, after all that time, he hadn't burned out. And he told me something I thought was very wise, and I will share it with you now. He said that if you do this kind of thing expecting to make a difference, you'll burn out. You do it because it's what God has made you to do. You do it because you have to do it, like breathing. And then you never burn out. And I could see that. I should also say that Dorothy Day was a friend of my former confessor, the late James Francis Cardinal McIntyre. And he said to me about her that he really enjoyed her company and she drove him crazy. And he could never quite tell if she was crazy or she was a saint.
Well, that reminds me of one of my favorite sayings. Takes a saint to live with a saint.
Well, there's that.
Isn't that interesting? I always wonder about that. Like, would St. Francis... Actually, I read, because I've been reading so many St. Francis biographies, that St. Francis was not chill with St. Dominic. They had conflicting...
They were friends, but they had issues.
Yeah. And stuff like that. It's... Obviously, everyone knows St. Augustine and St. Jerome.
St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure. They were friends.
Yeah.
But there was creative tension between them. St. Wilfrid of York and St. Bernard of Clairvaux couldn't stand each other.
Isn't that funny, though? Because these people are flooded with grace. They have so much charity and humility, but this other saint... just can't handle this other saint, man.
Yeah, she's too annoying. Well, don't forget they weren't saints then when they were alive.
Yeah, well, that's true. They weren't saints then.
It's important to bear in mind that your sanctity all depends on the state of mind you're in when you die.
But nevertheless, based on their acts, they're flooded with graces. They have special graces that we don't get, us normal folk.
Which shows you that being normal isn't everything it's cracked up to be. This is why I've been able to successfully avoid it my entire career.
It's just so funny. It's one of those things that always tickles me. Saints disagreeing with each other.
Yeah.
All right. Last question for today is from Gavin.
Okay. All right, Gavin.
All time periods and peoples have their own problems, but what era and region does your mind immediately jump to when you hear the glory days of Christendom?
Oof, well, gosh. Well, several places. I mean, I think of course, Charlemagne and his court. I think of, France when they were building the Gothic cathedrals. I think of Otto the Great. I think of Innocent III, Rome under Innocent III. I mean, there are a lot of different places. Christendom is a little bit like Camelot, in the sense that the common view of Camelot, whatever it was in reality, but the common notion is of this place where, for a brief while, the crud wasn't as strong as the good. Now, that's very typical of human history, you see, because every now and then someone arises, like Charlemagne, like Godefroy de Bouillon. The opening the Crusades would be another. Like Charles V, who, for a short time, beat back the forces of chaos, and for a little while, seemed to come a bit closer to the way things should be. And then fallen nature closes in on them again. It's like the clouds part for a bit, and there's this beautiful city. And then,
yeah.
But it goes on to live in song and story as an inspiration. It's interesting in all of these different places how they did look to the past for inspiration for the present. I mean, that's why the Arthurian legends are such a tremendous archetype, because probably there was never a place as perfect as Camelot was for its short period. Uh, it came out of darkness and horror, and it subsided back into it. And that was the way it was with the Carolingian Renaissance. That's the way it was with the Antonian Renaissance. That was on and on and on and on and on. Because that is the nature of human history. We sometimes the good triumphs sufficiently to beat back the darkness seemingly forever. But it's only seeming.
Just to expound on this in some fun areas. So this reminds me of, for obvious reasons, Midnight in Paris.
Oh,
Where, the golden days, right? Oh, the golden days are are this period. But the people living in that period probably weren't thinking it's the golden days at all. They're
no.
probably thinking about, St. Athanasius and St. Anthony the Great and the hermits in the desert, and thinking,
Yeah.
and the early Christians, and they're saying these early Christians are all being martyred, and we're over here having it easy, and they're in the desert.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. And of course, the funny thing about Midnight in Paris was the girl he meets in the 1920s, for whom the Belle Epoque of the 1890s
Yeah,
is
and she
the
just
end all
stays.
and be
Oh
all.
well, whoa! Spoiler alert. But
Spoiler.
yeah,
That, interestingly enough, even though it was directed by Woody Allen, it's a brilliant film in terms of, well, I mean, for anybody who loves Paris, obviously, but also about nostalgia.
yeah,
You know, uh, I mean, he meets all his favorite idols, and they're not total disappointments, but they're also not the great titans you imagine them to be.
yeah,
And they're um, there's a British series called Goodnight Sweetheart, about a fellow who's able to travel back to World War II Britain from the present, which is 1993, 94, 95. And again, it's a very poignant series, because he falls in love. He's already married here. Falls in love with a girl in London in 1940 during the Blitz. He ends up marrying her, and his explanation to himself is that you can't really call it either adultery or bigamy because his wife isn't born yet. But he travels freely back and forth between the two times. It's actually a very, very funny film, but it's a funny series, but it's also filled with all kinds of moral questions. I mean, serious moral questions. I don't just mean the time issues. But, it's interesting the way the people of 1940 will sometimes reprimand him for his modern attitudes, which they don't realize are modern because they don't know he's from the 1990s. But, like he says very offhandedly, when they're mentioning very reverently how they stood all night waiting to get a glimpse of George V and the Silver Jubilee in 1936. And he goes, well, why would anybody bother to watch an old man? And everybody in the pub looks at him like he's, absolutely nuts. And the woman, whom he later falls in love with and marries, says, Gary, that's a horrible thing to say. And, this other fellow says, well, what sort of disloyal garbage is that? They're getting very upset at him. It's typical of what a modern Londoner might say. But these are not modern Londoners. And it's played to a T. So, anyway, watch it if you can. Good night, sweetheart. Daily Motion. I've been watching it during this lockdown, as well as Dad's Army.
okay,
Getting caught up on my ancient BBC comedy.
excellent. Okay, time for Book of the Week.
Was that the last question?
That was the last question.
Whew, that's my last question hanging on the wall, looking as though we're alive. All right. What is our book?
Our book is On Faith by Antonin Scalia. Lessons from an American Believer.
The late lamented.
Forward by Justice Clarence Thomas, and edited by, and also this person did the introduction, Christopher J. Scalia. Christopher J. Scalia
Scalia.
is, Scalia, excuse me, I'm sorry, who he became a priest. It was one of Antonin's sons. But this has been a really enjoyable read. I'm about 100 pages in. Scalia, for obvious reasons, was always my favorite.
Italian?
How dare you? No, he was in Italian. Yeah, he reminded me of my dad in many ways. But I had a special respect for Scalia because of reading his opinions on various cases. He's incredibly outspoken. And I loved a lot of his dissenting opinions where he's trashing how stupid everyone is and it's ridiculous. And apparently, as it says in this book, there were a few times where he's writing a dissenting opinion for a judgment that is 8-1. And he's the one. So this is a person who is not afraid to buck the trend. You know what I mean? And do you have any thoughts on this gentleman?
Well, I do. I mean, he was a very interesting fellow. He how do I put it? He saw the Constitution in a clearer light, maybe, than the vast majority of his colleagues. It must have been a lonely position to be in, you know.
I think so.
I remember when Mr. Chief Justice Rehnquist was alive. They used to get on very well. I don't know how well Scalia got on with Roberts, but yeah, I mean, the problem, of course, is that I think he was very much aware also of the inflated position the Supreme Court has in national life, not simply as the court of final instance, but as the arbiter of faith and morals, which is certainly by no means what it was intended to be by the founders. The very fact that they've thrown out the notion of original intent shows you how far they've come from whatever it is the founders had in mind.
Let's see here. I want to give you I was a little worried about this because you wonder what such a man immersed in the machinery of the government. You worry that he's going to be Americanist a little bit. I'm not going to lie. But I don't feel he is an Americanist through a lot of things that he says. He has a chapter, for example, A Tale of Two Thomases, and where he compares Thomas Jefferson to, where Thomas Jefferson is talking about sort of calling Christians cretins because they're foolish in a lot of ways. And he compares that with St. Thomas More, who does it right, which I thought was very interesting. Let's see here. And he even quotes Jefferson. He kind of skewers Jefferson because apparently Jefferson had his own Bible.
Yes, he made it up. He took out all the miraculous bits and so forth.
And so he quotes Jefferson, which is, to give you a taste of Jefferson, because we're always bad-mouthing Jefferson. Here's Jefferson, who writes, "We find in the writings of Jesus' biographers, i.e. the evangelists, matter of two distinct descriptions. First, a groundwork of vulgar ignorance, of things impossible, of superstitions, fanaticisms, and fabrications. Intermixed with these, again, are sublime ideas of the Supreme Being, aphorisms and precepts of the purest morality and benevolence, sanctioned by a life of humility, innocence, and simplicity of manners, neglect of riches, absence of worldly ambition, and honors with an eloquence and persuasiveness which have not been surpassed. So, in other words, the Bible to Thomas Jefferson is a pretty tales of morality that, when it comes to the miraculous and supernatural, are ultimately false.
Yeah.
And so, Scalia really lambasts Jefferson, and let's see. He criticized Americans because I guess there was a miracle going on in Washington with the crying statues. There were statues that were crying, and the Washington Post did a report on it, and all this. And in talking about being a fool for Christ, he says the real fool are the people who dismiss the miraculous without even investigating.
Yeah.
That is the real fool, he says. Let's see. I wanted to read one other thing here. Oh, golly. Let's see here. Oh, and he talks about... This reminds me of Puritan's Empire a little bit, where you talk about the evolution of American history, where we come from, where we go. Because he is not evangelizing. He is analyzing several Supreme Court cases, which were kind of disappointments to him. And he says, my point in this discussion is not to criticize the holdings of these cases, but to point out the progression that they demonstrate in the perception of our national character, from a Christian nation to a religious nation to a nation that has no preference between religion and irreligion. I think that perception is by and large accurate, at least insofar as concerns what might be called the governing classes of society. The signs of the passing of the old religiousness are everywhere. In our laws, for example, which now approve many practices formerly forbidden because of a national aversion rooted primarily in religious beliefs. And he goes on and on. Anyhow, he's all about being countercultural, and it's a really good read. Now, I don't want to canonize Scalia. This is not. If you get this book, buy it out of an interest for a biography, because it's his speeches given at ceremonies and stuff like that, and to me it's fascinating. Oh, one last thing that's really going to sell everybody: Scalia went to the traditional Latin Mass.
He sure did, and it's funny, but I never met the man.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've been told by people who went, there were 3 friends of mine who went to the same Mass. And according to this other informant of mine, you could always see the 4 of them in the corner, wreathed in cigarette smoke, plotting.
That's funny. Yeah, and Scalia, he was a loudmouth Italian. He's always kibitzing, his son said. And his son would always get criticized for not pronouncing the Latin well, or the choice of songs, or his sermon. and so the son, actually, the priest who's actually banned him from going to Mass whenever he's doing the Mass.
Now, your father wouldn't have been like that.
Oh, that's funny. And but just an Italian American, classic Italian American, right there. So.
Well, just know that those of us who work for the Franchini family, we know what that's like.
All
And
right. Yeah.
I can tell you, having been conciliary to your family for a long I'm sorry, never mind.
It's advisor, Charles. That old terminology is no more. Okay.
I'm sorry, advisor. That's it. And listen, I learned a lot. Not just, I may have been there to give advice, but I'll tell you what, I learned a lot from certain of your family members. I would never have known what really happened to Judge Crater if your cousin Ernesto hadn't have told me.
Yeah.
And to this day, it's considered one of the great mysteries, you know? But Ernesto said, well, it doesn't matter what he said. The point is, having found out what really happened to Judge Crater was a real milestone in my life.
Loose lips sink ships, Charles.
Oh, that's right. This is televised.
Yeah.
Never mind. Forget what I said, ladies and gentlemen. Look, Judge Crater, I don't know what happened to it. Ernesto Franchini didn't know. I know our boss doesn't know. Forget I said anything about Judge Crater. The man is gone. God rest him.
All right. Anything to close out the show, Charles?
Yeah. Emotions are running really high right now, ladies and gentlemen. They really, really are. And for good reason, because a lot of terrible stuff is happening. But, I hate to quote the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but I will. Stay sane inside insanity. Keep, to the best of your ability, reserve judgment. Try not to fly off the handle at people. Try not to invest too heavily in any given theory about what's going on, because the truth of the matter is it's very difficult to know what's going on. And if you do have a pet theory, don't get angry at people who don't share it or who have other pet theories. Just, try to spread in your own circle the kind of quiet and tranquility that events seem hell-bent on tearing from us.
That's what I've been trying to meditate on for my own good, is not the things of man, but the things of God. Stop worrying about other creatures so much, because God is in charge. That's what I keep telling you. So, Jesus, I trust in you.
Yeah.
You're in charge.
He is in charge. And ladies and gentlemen, I told you earlier, I remember the long hot summer. I do. And it felt like the world was ending. And in some places, for some people, it actually did. But by and large, you know what? It stopped. And we went on to new misadventures. Even the Holocaust, ladies and gentlemen, even the Gulag Archipelago, eventually came to an end. And the vast majority of people who were around at that time just kept plugging along. Not generally happy with whatever they were facing, but they kept plugging, and the times changed, things moved along. What did not change was right and wrong and the requirements to get to heaven. Those did not change. And really, ladies and gentlemen, whatever the historical backdrop we find ourselves living against, what matters is that we get to heaven. If we manage to, then all of this will have been a bad dream with no more significance than except that what we did during this time will have determined whether we got to heaven or not. But other than that, presuming we get to heaven, the pains and upsets that we've gone through will be as nothing to the joys that are waiting for us. If we go to hell, of course, then the pleasures and joys we've known in this life will have been as nothing. Or as my late father used to say, if you go to hell, this is as close to heaven as you'll ever get. If you go to heaven, this is as close to hell as you get.
That's the other thing that I've been trying to tell myself, is these crosses that get put on you are sent for your sanctification, because there's a plan, and the plan is to get you to heaven. These aren't chaotic, random happenings that just are meaningless. No.
So don't let yourself get too upset or overwrought. I know that's easy to say. It's harder to do. I find myself flying off the handle at current events 2 or 3 times a day. You look at all this stuff, it's horrific. but it will pass. And we just have to remember that it will pass, and that it doesn't change the essential truth of why you and I are here, which is to save our own souls and to save other people's souls. That's it.
The hardest part about this is still, for me, was the lack of sacraments, and now they're coming back. So happy day. And,
well, do you think maybe you'll skip the sacraments in order to make a statement? I don't know what statement that would be.
I don't even.
I don't.
That's such a perverse suggestion on your part. I don't even. It's just.
See, I don't even know what the statement would be. I mean, maybe take out a whole page of the LA Times saying I'm refusing to receive the sacraments as a statement, and then not say what the statement is.
I'll make a statement. I'll get down on my knees to receive communion. Make a statement by getting down on my knees. How do you like that, Kaepernick? How do you like that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I'll show you a statement. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, we are going a little cray-cray here, but seriously, I'm very glad the sacraments have returned to California, to SoCal anyway. Yeah. And they're certainly back here. They're playing games, of course, about communion in the hand versus communion on the tongue, but that will pass eventually. It does make one resent the pettiness of the liberal clergy. They do this because they can, and I have to, keep my hands off their throats when I see them.
Yeah.
Well, it's very upsetting. No, as a rule, if you put your hands around somebody's throat and you start squeezing, their results are very often suboptimal.
Now, Charles, am I going to have to put a picture of a cute puppy or little chicks or something? How do you like it, huh?
Oh, yeah. I sent you a very cute, that thing was so cute, I don't even know what it was.
I don't remember.
Well, I mean, looking at it, it could have been anything from a puppy to a hamster. It was so cute. I mean, I felt slightly sick to the pit of my stomach. But I sent it to you anyway to help you with your issues.
Yeah, well, it actually didn't help me at all. It actually is enabling me. I explained to Charles because Charles wants to punish people with his pictures of super sweet things. And I said, Charles, not only have I built up a tolerance of saccharin, but I built up a dependence of saccharin. So now you've just fed my addiction.
Yeah, he's been good to go for the whole show, ladies and gentlemen. It's really kind of sad to me. I wished I'd known. I would never have said the stupid thing. But
all right, we're prattling, we're rambling, we're devolving into
drivel. But it does leave room for a couple of questions.
Yes, that's very true. Go ahead.
Well, what is the day of the week tomorrow?
Tomorrow is Monday.
And if it's Monday,
it's off the menu.
And the soul you save
may be your own.
That's it, ladies and gents. See you next week.